beautiful thing with this software is you can set conditions on the color. So while the trans temp, coolant temp, and oil temp is below a certain threshold, meaning operating temperature, it's blue. And then as I get up to operating temp, it'll turn to green. Now notice my RPM sweep turned green. Hi everybody, how are you? My name is Dan Dulac and welcome back to my channel where I am building a V10 powered Ultima Evolution convertible. This is episode number 52 in part 3 of a 3-part series where I am decoding the OEM CAN bus on the Audi R8 / Lamborghini Huracan V10 engine that's in my Project Ultima, Project Top Gun. We have gone through in part 1 decoding and reverse engineering the OEM CAN bus. In part 2 we did a little bit more reverse engineering and then created our first DBC file. And in part 3, in this episode, we're taking that DBC file and we're going to create our MoTeC display. So we've covered a lot. If you missed part 1 or part 2, I'll link those in the description below so you can go check those out and get caught up on where we are today. If you're purely interested in just creating a MoTeC display with the Dash Manager and Display Creator software, you've come to the right place. This video, we're going to cover all of that. So, without further ado, let's jump right in. All right, we are going to pick up right where we left off in part 2, where we created our first DBC file. So now we're going to move over to the MoTeC software, and we're going to start with the MoTeC Display Manager software. And we're going to import that DBC into MoTeC so we can then create some channels, and then those channels can be used in the display creator, in this case my C127 display. First thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to just take a quick look at my DBC file with the Cavaser DBC editor. And if you recall, we created this file called Ultima Evo DBC YouTube. So let's open that up. I did go ahead and rename some of these just to make it a little bit clearer, so when we create the channels in the MoTeC software, it's pretty self-explanatory. So I have one called Car Control. Within Car Control, we've got my brake switch, engine RPM, throttle position. With the temperature CAN message, I've got coolant, oil, and intake air temp. And then under transmission, I've got my trans temp. So those are all ready to go. Again, I'm confirming that there's no errors in the DBC. Cavaser's pretty good about finding errors. If you had little endian set and big endian on a couple others, it would catch that for you because every single CAN message and signal must be the same, either all big endian or all little endian. And by the way, one other tip here, the graph here in the upper right shows the bit positions, very similar to SavvyCAN, but it shows with an arrow the direction that the byte order is being read. So again, if you come down here and change the byte order from Intel, which is little endian, to Motorola, which is big endian, you can see how that changes here on the bit position chart here, which again helps you understand how this works. So it's pretty cool. Okay, now that we've confirmed this, I'm going to close this. We're going to open up my display manager for the MoTeC C127. This is Dash Manager. And so we're going to create something from scratch here. So I walk you through the steps. So there's 2 pieces of software you need with MoTeC. You need the Dash Manager, and then you need Display Creator. If you opt not to buy the Display Creator add-on to your display where you can create any display you like, Dash Manager is really all you're going to need. It's got some predefined templates in there that you can use. I've got the ability, and I bought the extra license, so I can create my own 100% custom and unique display. Super powerful, as you'll see. So we're going to use 2 bits of software. Dash Manager is what you use for all your CAN messaging. This is where you create your initial signals, and you create a DBC file that Display Creator will use. So you're basically taking the DBC we've created, then you're converting it into a MoTeC DBC, which uses extended CAN messages. Not going to get into that detail here. You don't really even need to get into that once you get into the MoTeC software, but that's the converting a standard DBC to an extended DBC that the MoTeC software will read. So let's go and jump right in and do that. So I'm going to come up here and create a new configuration. There's a bunch here for pre-configured devices, the MoTeC M1 ECU and so forth. I'm simply going to create or select this default. Now, the first thing we want to do here is go up under this icon here, which is Setup Display, or you can go up here and click the display from the functions menu. It's the same thing. Either one will work. So this is the pre-configured display that's in here. Again, because we've got Display Creator, we don't need any of this. So I'm going to remove this. Back up to Edit, Add. We are going to create an internal display using Display Creator. This is the key. I'm going to rename this C127 Ultima. Click OK. And the other thing I'm going to do up here is we're going to create a couple of pages in Display Creator. And display page, I want to select that. That's so within the Display Creator software, I can configure button presses on my keypad or rotary keypad controller to change the page. So we'll do that. And we'll leave this as is for now. Click OK. Now the next thing we want to do is come up here to communications. This is where we're going to set and import the DBC file that we've created. So as you recall back in episode 1 where I talked about my CAN bus topology, the C127 has two CAN bus connections, CAN 1 and CAN 2. CAN 1, I'm going to leave just as is, only that I'm going to tick this Display Creator box, relay the data here. And then CAN 2, this is where the OEM CAN bus, remember at 500 kilobits per second. So I'm going to change this to 500K. Tick this relay to Display Creator, all the data that's in here, all these channels, we're going to relay to Display Creator. And then I'm simply going to click Import DBC. Now this is the file we created in episode 2, in part 2 of this 3-part series. I'm simply going to select this, open, and then it brings up this window. So you can see in the bottom part of this window, these are the imported DBC messages. So that exactly as we configured, it preserves the naming convention all the way here. So this first column is the name that's in the DBC file, and then this channel name column, MoTeC is going to create channel names here, named exactly as we see here. I could actually go in here, if I select one of these, edit it, I could actually change the channel name. So inside MoTeC, huge database of predefined channel names, and you could see them all listed here. So I could in fact use a predefined MoTeC channel name here, which would be fine. In fact, I believe there's one called break state. There is. I'm just going to leave this as is, but I just want to give you an idea. If your naming convention isn't right or accurate and you want to use a default MoTeC naming convention, you can select their channel here. But I'm going to cancel all this. And the other thing we will look at is when I do edit one of these, you'll see all the offset, the length, multiplier, all of this stuff is imported. You don't have to touch any of it. And I got caught up on this a little bit. I thought I would have to go in here and figure all this stuff out as far as the multiplier, the divisor, the adder. Again, this is all MoTeC language of what we learned in the previous 2 episodes, which was bias or scaling factor or offset. This is the language MoTeC uses here, multiplier, divisor, adder. It's kind of the same thing. Again, I'm not going to get into detail on this, but just know when your DBC file is set up correctly, you don't have to touch any of this stuff. When you import the DBC, you're good to go. So we're just going to leave all this as is. And I'm simply going to say OK here. And you'll notice now it's created 3 CAN messages here. 105, 441, and 640. You remember back in the last two parts of this series, these are what we identified and reverse engineered off the CAN bus. So when we look at car control, you can see it created these channels. They're called receive channels. This is important because this is how the MoTeC software is going to then read from these channels the data to put up on the display. So I can take a look at one of these. If we edit, again, this is all the specific CAN settings. You don't have to go in here. I'm just showing you this just because you can come in here and create some custom setups. Even this is all done for you by default. If I click engine RPM and change, again, I can change the channel name if I wanted to. So again, there's many different types of channels in the default database of the MoTeC software. I think there's one called engine speed. There's one called engine RPM with a space in the middle. There's another one here, RPM2. So there's a few of these. Again, don't have to touch any of this, but I highlight it because you can change the name of the channels using the MoTeC default channel naming convention. My naming convention is, I actually did this on purpose. I didn't create any spaces between the words in my channel name, whereas MoTeC does. They put a space in. So when I'm looking through all the channels, I can quickly see the channels that are mine, that I've created with no spaces in the names, versus the MoTeC channel names, which have spaces in the names. Just a little convention I came up with. So in my mind, as I'm going through, I know what's an imported DBC channel versus a default one within the MoTeC software. All right. So we're just going to click OK here. And now if I go back up to display settings, I have to tell the Dash Manager software which channels to then pass or hand over to the Display Creator DBC file. So I'm going to see there's a bunch of default ones in here, but there's also the ones I created. Okay, so you could see coolant temp, no space. Remember my naming convention. I know that's the imported one from my DBC file. Versus dash temp, this would be the temperature of the dash of the C127. That's a default MoTeC channel. Display page, RPM is one I imported. So in any event, you get the idea here. So what I'm going to simply do is grab the first one, hold down the shift key, grab the bottom one, add them all, and you can add all. It doesn't really bother anything if you add them all. I typically like to only grab the ones that I'm going to use as part of my dash setup. So I'm going to move a couple of these back over. Brightness switch I don't need. Let's see, the G-force ones I don't quite need for this basic setup that we're going to go through. Mode button, next button, reset, we don't need. Okay, so here are the channels that we're going to create a MoTeC DBC file. All right. So now that I've done this, I can click OK, and you'll see them all here. And we can also see the frequency of which this data is updated. Again, very important because this will dictate how often the data is updated on your dash display. So you can see RPM, that's only, the frequency is once a second. I want to change that. I want to go much higher than that. So I can double click and I can change the frequency of each of these telemetry attributes. I'm going to go 20 there. Throttle position, I want at a high frequency. And then coolant temp and all the temperatures, twice a second is fine. So I'm just going to select twice a second, 2 hertz for these. And again, the higher the frequency, the more traffic you're putting onto the CAN bus. So I'll get to that here in a minute and why that's important. Brake switch, we want that high frequency, 20 times. Dash temp is fine, display, that's fine. So we'll leave it at that. Click OK, and we're good to go there. Now the other thing I want to change here, as I mentioned, is I'm going to include for both the CAN buses, I'm going to add channels to measure errors on the CAN bus and CAN bus utilization for both CAN 1 and CAN 2. Again, I can report that in my dash. So if CAN bus utilization starts to get too high, I'll have to pull some channels back. Haven't run into that yet. It's a lot of traffic required to do that, but in my experience, it's good practice to measure and look for error counts, transmit errors, and or overall CAN bus utilization. So click OK. Now, because I added those, I need to go back and add those CAN bus utilization metrics, those channels, into my Display Creator DBC. So I need to do that. So if I go back here to add, you're going to see now I've got some new channels. All these CAN bus channels are in here now because I've enabled them. I've activated them. So click the first one, hold down the Shift key, grab the last one, and I can add them over in bulk. Okay. Click OK, and now I've added those to my DBC. So again, any bit of telemetry that you want to show on your display has to be in this list, because we're going to take this list and then import it into Display Creator to create our dash. So it has to be in this list. And by the way, you can go back after the fact. If you're in Display Creator, as we see, and you're like, oh crap, I missed a bit of telemetry or I missed a channel, you can go back in here, add it, and then re-import your or update your DBC in Display Creator. So that's the idea. So again, if you forget, it's not the end of the world, but it just helps with the workflow if you can think ahead of time all the channels that you're going to want to report on your dash. All right, click OK. And then the other thing I want to do here, again, under my display settings, I forgot to do this. When I generate a DBC file, I want to give it a specific name. So we're going to call this Ultima DBC, actually we'll call it MoTeC DBC YouTube. So that's the file, that's the DBC file that the Dash Manager is going to create, that we will then import into Display Creator. All right, so we can click OK there. I'm going to save this Dash Manager configuration, and we will call this Ultima C127 YouTube. So that's the configuration. Okay, so we're done with Dash Manager. Now what we need to do is go into Display Creator, import this brand new MoTeC DBC file, and then create our dash. So let's go ahead and do that. Up here under Display Creator, we're going to open this up, and I'm going to select New here. And when I do that, I've got the choice of the orientation of my display. If I had it mounted in the car sideways, or for some reason upside down, I wanted to flip it, whatever the case, I can choose the orientation here. Click Next. There are some predefined and pre-canned dashes in here. Again, on YouTube, MoTeC's YouTube channel, they go through a lot of how you can use these basic templates here. So I'm not going to repeat that. I'm going to create a brand new one from scratch because, again, there's very limited data that I've found on how to create a brand new dash display from scratch. So we're going to do that here. So I'm going to click this empty project and then finish. So I've got an empty project here with a page, 2 pages, an overlay page, and page 0. Again, this is default. I can right click in this area and add a new page, blank. Okay, now I've got 2 pages. So again, you can create multiple dash pages in here. So the first thing we need to do up under communications, so the kind of the way this workflow works in Display Creator is you start from the left tab and work your way right. So the first tab is settings. This is where you can set up your default fonts and so forth. Default font for your project. I actually prefer, there's one down here called Sui Generis. We're going to add this one as my default font. You can add your color style, whatever default color style. So that's pretty simple. But then if we click this Communications tab, this is where I import the DBC we just created with Dash Manager. This icon here, import, click this, and you'll notice the DBC we just named in Dash Manager, Ultima MoTeC DBC for YouTube. Let's open this up. And you can see all the channels that we created. The native MoTeC channels, but in addition to the channels we imported via our reverse engineered DBC file. So you can see down here, for example, coolant temp, oil temp, intake air, trans, etc. Okay, and they've kind of grouped them here automatically. So I'm simply going to click OK here. And you'll notice it creates this Ultima DBC file here. And we can see the rate here on the far right column of each of my bits of telemetry here. You'll see the address down the middle. This is an extended CAN ID, so this is a little bit different than we're used to. So MoTeC uses extended CAN IDs. Again, we don't have to get into details here. We're not going to drill into this. It's just for information. We don't have to touch any of that, in fact. But just know that we converted standard CAN bus into extended via that Dash Manager process we just went through. So now we have a native MoTeC DBC that uses extended CAN IDs. So if we select, say, throttle position, you'll see over here on the right, it gives some data about it, the channel name. If I look at, say, coolant temp, you'll see it's got the correct signal description in degrees Celsius and so forth. So again, this is just the raw CAN attributes here. Now if I go to channels and functions, we're going to see the very same list. And what this list tells you is when you're building a dash and so forth, it tells you where these channels are being used in your various display pages that we'll get to here briefly. So it's kind of nice. If you change one here, it will ripple or cascade through all your pages for which it's been used. If I look, say, at engine RPM, well, let's actually take a look at oil temp, for example. This is where I can change the unit. So if I prefer Fahrenheit on my display, the native value is Celsius, but if I prefer Fahrenheit, I can simply come in here and change the unit. And so you'll see here, it changes to Fahrenheit. So when I report this in my display, the label is Fahrenheit. I can use Fahrenheit. So you can do that with all these metrics here. I'm just going to leave that in Celsius for now. But just know you can change the unit here. You can set maximum minimums. Again, this is not imported in the DBC. We did this in the DBC, if you recall, in part 2. But if I went in here and say did, I think for oil temp, the max is 194 and the min is like negative 48, something like that. I could set a default value. So when I'm creating a dash, there's a default value that's displayed. So I can see how it looks on the dash. Again, I'm going to leave that default for now. So good. So we've imported our DBC. This was quite honestly, that's the trickiest part to grasp and learn. But as you can see, it's really not that hard once you do it. But I couldn't find anything on YouTube, any description on YouTube on how to do what we just did. So hopefully this is illuminating for you, and it kind of dismays any apprehension about the complexity here, because it really isn't that hard once you go through. The alarms tab here, you can go through and create different alarms. We're not going to do that here in this example. And now we're at the pages. This is where we can go and start to create our very first dash. Now that we've imported all the CAN data, all the CAN IDs, we're going to start to add those here, those channels here to report and display on our dash. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to create a real simple dash setup here. There's quite a few YouTube videos out there that show how to go ahead and create different gauges and bar graphs and so forth in here. I'm not going to drill into that too much. So what I'll do is we'll set up a simple display first with all the data. Then I'll actually go and open the display I'll be using for the Ultima, which is a lot more, call it complicated, a little more complex. It took me a long time to create and build, but then we'll review that and I'll kind of show you how I did it. But we'll start really simple. The software is fairly intuitive. Once you get into creating some of this stuff, it's pretty easy to learn. But hopefully this will just get you started here with the Display Creator software. Okay. The first thing I'm going to do here is we're going to create just some simple bar graphs with the temperature settings and so forth. So I'm going to go up here, click this bar, click my mouse, and it will create a bar graph for me. First thing we got to do is we got to tell it what channel to look at, what channel to report the data on. And you're going to notice all the channels that we imported are in here. You can click the drop down list, or if you click this box, it will actually open the entire channel list for you. So let's add coolant temp. Okay, and then we have to define this bar graph, what the first value is, the last value, or what we want to show. We can set up the major divisions, minor divisions. Let's remove minor divisions. And again, this can all be edited after the fact as you're tuning and tweaking this. So it's pretty straightforward. The last value I want to say is 150 Celsius being the top end. I can set up segments here, change different colors, change my needle color and location and so forth. We're just going to leave that all basic here. So if I click OK, you'll notice it removed the minor divisions and it set it from 0 to 150 Celsius. We can then come in here and change the size of this chart. I can, in the right hand column here, I can drill into this and we could actually edit the text fields, the type of text. We could change our font and so forth here. We can also change the starting and end values of, again, the bar chart here. Let's do this. I'm going to go in here and actually change the size of each one of these values. So rather than it being 20, I'm going to do 10. See how that looks. That's pretty small, but that's okay. And so you can see quickly how this starts to take time when you're changing the fonts here. In fact, I wonder if we can come over to my settings here and add a text style and go 10 small. I have not tried this before. Let's try this. And then if I go back to my pages, and if I multi-select all this, I'm just trying to figure out if there's a simple way where I can go and change the font here. Oh, yeah, here we go. Here's my size. Ah, that's better. So I can change my text style with just a drop-down menu pick for each one of these. This is where a lot of the customization comes in too, where you can go gangbusters just customizing the heck out of this to your heart's content. All right. The other thing I think I'm going to want to do here is for the bar segment, let's change the color style. So let's go to a solid color. And then I'm going to do like a green. All right. So that's the bar segment. Next thing I'm going to do is add a label. So we can call this, click in the box, and then over here on the far right, I can say coolant temp. My text style, let's shrink this down a little bit. Coolant temp. We can place that here. Okay, so very simple one. You can start to see you can tier everything up here. You can create a nice background image here. So underneath this image section, click the image icon, then click on your chart, And there's some default library. So this all comes with the MoTeC software. You can create different faded images and so forth for the background. So we've got our first basic bit of telemetry here on the dash. The next thing I can do is if I go over to this simulate button, we can simulate this. So let's do that. If I click play, I got to save the project first, so let's do that. Let's call this Ultima Display Creator YouTube. Click save. Okay, so now it's got an error condition. So if there's an error, it'll tell you what it is down here. Page has no condition. So I need to go up and create a page condition. So if I come over here, we want to add a condition over here. And let's type in display page equal to 1. This is my first display page. I could say OK. That should do it. I'm going to click save. Back to simulate. Let's try this again. There we go. It's going to work. So again, you'll find some of the, if there's an error in the simulation, it'll tell you before you try to import it up into your display. Okay, so let's make this a little smaller. So we don't see anything here. So why is that? Well, we have to come in here and we have to tell the software to look at display page number 1 that we just defined. So as soon as I click this up arrow, boom, 1, there's my coolant temp. It comes up because this is the first page in the display. Now we've got coolant temp here. So again, if I come down to my values, I select it, and then up here in the right, as I notch this up, the Celsius, I can see my gauge moves up. So again, this is simulating data. This is simulating the channel values that we're pulling off from the CAN bus. I can simply come up here and say, I don't know, 95 Celsius, hit tab, and it will create that metric. Now the other thing we can do, the other tip or trick here is if I go back over here to my channels and functions tab, if I set a max and min value for coolant temperature, so let's say maximum 194 Celsius, go back to my simulate page, play again, you'll notice that in the upper right, it changes it to a sweeping bar that I can choose. So now I can sweep this back and forth. Rather than hitting the up or down arrow, I can click and hold and drag this again to simulate the values. So pretty cool how, again, as you're creating this, you simulate. I find this the most powerful piece of this software is you create your entire dash setup, all your channels, all your display widgets, and then you can come in here and click simulate and play with the values and see that it works, that it's operating and the display is behaving like you want when it's on the real life display, MoTeC display. So it's pretty cool here. All right, I'm going to stop the simulation. I'm going to show you how easy it is. Once you've created your first widget, you can simply copy and paste and replicate them to quickly build out widgets for the other channels. So I'm going to stop my simulation, go back over to the pages here. So now over here on my page view, I'm going to create a group. So I'm going to multi-select, right-click, and say grouping, create group. And you'll notice it creates a grouping now with coolant temp. If I expand this out, you can see all the elements that make up this widget. Now here's the really cool thing. I can duplicate this group. I can do a Control-C, Control-V, open this up, and you'll notice it replicates it right over the top. So I'm going to move this down, expand this group. First, I'm going to rename this to oil temp. And then when I click my gauge here, I'm going to change this from coolant to oil temp. Very quickly, now you can see I've got a coolant temp and an oil temp here on the left. If I wanted to change, again, the max and min values or whatnot, I could do that in here. I could simply go to configure gauge, change my tick values, anything I wanted custom for this particular bit of telemetry for oil temp. But that's going to be fine. I'm going to do it again for transmission temperature. Control C, Control V. Go in here and call this transmission temp. Go to my gauge, change the channel that's referencing, and go to trans temp. Then over here on the left, I can simply click and hold my mouse, pull it down, and move my trans temp description or label over here as well. So pretty quick, once you create one particular widget, you can copy and paste and reuse them over and over, and it lets you create a dash pretty quickly here. I'm going to go back over to simulate. We're going to simulate this thing. So now you see I've got coolant, oil, and transmission temp. And again, I can change the data over here by changing the values. So if I go to oil temp, click oil temp here, I can increase it. And I can do the same with transmission temperature. I haven't set a max or min value on it, so in this case I click the up arrow in the upper right, or I can just select and enter in a value, and my gauge changes. So pretty simple, pretty straightforward setup on this, and again it requires some playing around and you get the hang of it. It's not really that hard, it's fairly intuitive once you get into the software. So that's the basics. Again, there's a few there's many YouTube videos out there that kind of go through how to do some of this here, so I'm not going to get into too much detail on this. A lot of it's pretty self-explanatory. You can go in and just start poking around and figuring it out. Obviously, come back to this video in the comments field. If you're poking and playing and you have any questions, comment in the comments below, and I'll be sure to respond and give you some guidance if you're unable to find anything on YouTube or you get stuck. So that's pretty cool. So the next thing we're going to do is, let me go ahead and we'll open up the display I've created for, which is ultimately going to end up on my MoTeC C127 Dash. And then we're going to go out in the garage, upload it, fire the car up, and test the telemetry. So let's go and show you what I've built. All right, so I am going to go ahead and open up. I'm not going to save any changes here. Say no. I'm going to open up the project I've been working on with the Ultima, and it's right here. I'm going to open up this project. You're going to see a bunch of different screens here. Again, I've spent a fair bit of time tinkering around with this. I kind of get addicted to it. You can go in and create unlimited. Whatever you can think, you can create here, and you're off and running. So let me describe for you what we're looking at here. The first thing we see on this page 0, this is my splash screen. So as soon as the display powers up, I turn the car on. For 5 seconds, this splash screen will display, which is pretty neat. After 5 seconds, this page will display. And there's a lot going on here. Obviously, I've got everything enabled, everything turned on. You can see all the groupings over here. So all the different bits, my status lights are all in the center of the gauge. I can enable and disable those. Warning lights, light indicators, directionals, exhaust valve switch, power steering assist, my fan controls you can see on the perimeter. In fact, in the lower right here, you can see when my fan turns on, my main cooling fan at the front of the car and the radiator, this icon will light up, as will the transmission cooler fan and the oil cooler fan. So as those turn on, these little icons will light up. I kind of took inspiration from the Huracan display. This might look familiar, and I kind of replicated that here. In the center, I've got my gear position sensor, the speed, odometer, local time, all of this. So you can see all the groupings here in the left. I can enable and disable, again, each one of these. Tack I can make disappear, and so forth. Just to give you some tips here, so you remember back when we had to set a condition for page 1. So here's an example where with my rotary switch, I can change the page by simply turning the rotary on my 5-button rotary MoTeC switch. So when the counter is at 1, it shows this page. When the counter is at 2, it shows this page. Again, just a different view. All the data and telemetry is there, just in a different view, more of a textual based view. But you'll notice here, I've set up a condition where both these cases must be true for page 1 to be active. Counter has to be set to 1, and the device has to be up for more than 5 seconds. That's how I get the splash. As soon as 5 seconds passes, it goes from the splash page over to this first page. So that's how that works. Okay, so these are all the different widgets. If I open up my TAC, let's take a look at this. First of all, there's an image that I use, the ring in the upper right. You can see this is part of the MoTeC software package. You can pull this down, place it, resize it, however big of gauge you want. So I use that, and then I simply set up a circular gauge. That's up here on this menu pick. This is a circular gauge. I set that up, and I obviously customize this for my very specific needs. If I expand this down, you can see my needle size. I can change the color, the width, the length of my needle, starting value, ending value, all of this. I can change the font of the text, so I can manipulate each number here on my gauge. Again, I'm not going to go through too much of this. I wanted to show you kind of the end result of just poking and playing and kind of driving this around. I've created a G-force meter as well. The C127 includes sensor, G-force sensor in there. So lateral, longitudinal, and vertical. I took a little image of an RS model, an overhead shot, and placed the G meter bubble right over the top of it. So as G's change, this ball will move around in this chart. That's pretty cool. And then I've just been playing with some other look and feel. Again, you can go crazy with this. Just a different kind of look and feel. You can create as many pages as you want. I created another one here where I'll start to just create a list of bar charts with all the key metrics or telemetry here. So it's really quick and easy to see. So those are just a few of the pages. Let me go ahead and simulate this for you so you can see what this looks like. So we're going to hit play here and simulate this dash because there's a lot going on, and I've got a lot more channels in here as well versus the example where we had a dozen or so. I've got a lot more in this configuration. All right, so here it starts with my splash screen. And again, I can manipulate this data. Remember, I've got to do two things in order for it to move. The display has to be up longer than 5 seconds. So let me go change that. Display uptime is now at 0, but if I inch this up to 6, it's got to be greater than 5. That is met, and then set my counter to 1. The counter has to be 1. As soon as I click this to 1, that next page is going to show. And there we go. So there's a blank. It's kind of blank. There's no data going on. So like we learned previous, we've got to go in. We can enter data in here. So I'm going to first go for engine RPM. Let's load this up. Let's run it at around 2000 RPM. You'll notice that the sweep is blue. The beautiful thing with this software is you can set conditions on the color. So while the trans temp, coolant temp, and oil temp is below a certain threshold, meaning operating temperature, it's blue. And then once the car is up to operating temp, coolant, oil, and trans, that sweep will turn green, which is pretty cool. You can go crazy with some of this stuff. So let me show you what that looks like. So coolant temperature, let's bring this up closer to operating. And you'll notice down here in the lower right, as I manipulate this, it sweeps up. So you can change this, and notice it too has a color. When it's below operating temp, it's blue. Once it approaches operating temp, it turns green. All right. Let's find engine oil temperature. Same thing, it'll start as blue. This is in the upper left. And then as I get up to operating temp, it'll turn to green. Now notice my RPM sweep turned green. So now again, just visually, I could just look at my RPM sweep as I'm driving. If it's blue, I don't have to rev it too hard, let the engine get up to temp. As soon as everything's green, we're good to go. Just like the sweep turns to green when the temperatures are up to operating temp, it also changes color when I approach red line. So as soon as I hit 8,000, it goes to red. I think red line on this car is 8,700 RPM. Again, this is all configurable. I could change it from orange at 7 and then 8 to red. Again, unlimited with the amount of creativity you could get with some of this as well. Let me go over to transmission temperature. Let's change it. Again, it will start blue, and then once it gets up over 50, it'll turn green. Again, all configurable, which is sweet. Let's take a look at, say, for example, the speed. And by the way, with a long list, you can simply type in your search window here, speed. I've got a speed sensor on the back, so I could use GPS speed, because again, the MoTeC supports GPS, so I could use GPS speed. I'm actually going to use the real wheel speed sensor, Hall effect sensor I've got in the rear. So you can see that here as I increase the speed, 88 miles an hour, so you can get a view for what that looks like. Let me show you one other quick tip that was a huge time saver for me. And you notice all these little icons, these little images all over the place. Well, originally I had started Googling them. There's some in the image library here within the MoTeC software, but I was looking for some different things and looking for different images to use here, little icons. And then I discovered that MoTeC actually has a font set that you can use with a lot of them. So let me show you that over here. On MoTeC's website, on their Display Creator page, if you scroll down, by the way, they've got some beautiful examples of some dashes you can create here. If I scroll down, you could see there's 3 different font sets that come in the software. A font set called MoTeC 1, MoTeC 2, and then MoTeC 3. And you can see here, based on the keystroke, when you select that font set, you can get access to these icons. And they've got a great set here. Again, you can, by changing the font size, you can change the size of these icons. And they're very high fidelity, high quality icons, which are great. So that's what I used over here on the dash. So for example, if we look at, open up my status lights group here, and I look at parking lights, you'll notice the image itself, it's highlighted over here on the left, but it's a text image and it's the letter K, but I used the MoTeC font group 01. So back on my web page, if I go back to my font group 01 and look for the letter capital K, here it is. You can see that's the image. So it's really pretty slick. This is the decoder ring. You come over to this page and then you know what letter to enter. And then of course you can change the size of this. So if you wanted something huge, 100 pixels in size or 400, you can, and you notice the quality is very high resolution. So it's really quite nice. And there you go. So that's just a little tip with all these icons. It's very, very powerful. You don't have to go out and Google search any images. Chances are the icon you want is in that font set. And one of those font sets, MoTeC 1, MoTeC 2, or MoTeC 3. Now, the other thing I can do here is we can change pages. So you'll notice, as you recall, I had additional pages in here. So let's change the counter from 1 to 2. And now my display page changes, and I can see all the data is updated here on this page. Again, just a different view. I've got drivetrain telemetry on the left, all my electronics on the right. So I think that's pretty much the extent of it. The next thing we're going to do is then upload this onto the dash in the car, start up the car, and then validate that all that telemetry is working and being updated in real time. So let's jump back into the garage and give this a try. All right, guys, that's going to do it for this video. It went longer than I thought. I figured we'd cut it here and wait for the next video where I'll show you how I will upload these 2 files, Dash Manager and Display Creator files. The 2 we just created, we'll upload those to the dash, and then we'll fire up the car, bring it up to operating temperature, and follow all the telemetry and make sure it all works. So that's a pretty exciting step forward. And then we're going to get back to our regularly scheduled build videos. I know I've taken somewhat of a break with these 3 kind of tutorial type videos. So for all my followers, eager to get back to the regular types of build videos. No sweat, those things are coming. So we are getting close to finalizing this build. I am super excited. Spring is on the way. We're into February, and I'm excited to get this car on the road. So guys, until then, we'll see you next time.